I'll just check if we are live on YouTube. We are. Hi, everybody. Welcome to Caravan Batak. This is a video podcast, and you might be listening it on YouTube or Spotify. So, welcome to the podcast. My name is Ishan Sharma, and this is a new podcast where I'll try to have conversations with people that I admire their works and maybe their legacy. So one such person is, of course, Jawaharlal Nehru, India's first prime minister, a statesman, a writer. For us, the history students, an amateur historian of sorts, and a multifaceted guy, a truly interesting character to study for a historian, because his ideas are as relevant as it were in the 19th or in the 20th century. We are living in the 21st century now. Today, uh, on his birth anniversary, we'll discuss his ideas, his politics, his legacy, and the future of what Nehruvian India was supposed to be in today's time and age that we are living in. And to do that, I have a very interesting guest with me, Manas Firag Bhattacharjee. He's the author of a book called Nehru and the Spirit of India that I regard as a contemporary's estimate, as Walter Crocker's book was a few, in the last century. But in the 21st century, this book deals with some of the most interesting aspects of Nehru's life as a politician, as a leader of independent India, and of course, his previous book was also very interesting, called Looking for the Nation Towards Another Idea of India. So we are going to talk about Nehru's idea, Nehru's legacy, and much more. So thank you, Manesh, for agreeing to do this. Truly an honor hosting you back on Caravan.
Thank you so much, Ishan. It's great, speaking to you again. And we have, of course, been in touch and often exchange notes and ideas about, what's going on around us. So it's really my pleasure to be here talking to you. And I'm also thankful to your platform, Carva, for this.
Thank you so much, Manush. So let's start with the very basic. In this podcast, I will try to keep it simple because, what we as students of history or academicians tend to do is we try to complex, easy, and already much complex issues. So we kind of make distance from the rest. But we'll try to simplify here. First of all, let's talk about Nehru's idea of India. The title of the book also talks about the spirit of India. And what I believe Nehru's idea was that India should be a secular, a scientifically tempered society that believes in science and technology rather than mythology and religion or theology, what he meant, then something that is uh, maybe which looks at the past while also looking at the future to make our present much more interesting, much more livable, inhabitable, and where everybody has a right and everybody's rights are secured under the constitution. But some of these realities are not there anymore in the times that we live in today. How do you see Nehru's idea, and how do you see the relevance of that idea in today's times?
Right. Thanks, Ishan, for that very simple but very clear and precise and very important question. So, so this distinction that you just made, between say the scientific temper on the one hand and the sort of mythological or mythical sort of idea on the other. It is interesting that this distinction itself um, is part of the larger problem that we are looking into, which is very precisely the problem of modernity. And it is only, under this problem or within this problem of modernity that we raise, questions, uh, not just of history, but also of these elements or these aspects of modernity. And along with it, this, even larger questions around what is yourself, how to relate with the past, all these questions, which become a part of our understanding of history. So, one interesting thing I would say is that reading Nehru, you're right that he is making a strong case for a certain critical, rational, scientific approach to what we understand as history. But then it is not, again, typically a totally enlightenment, sort of approach or understanding of history, because having read Indian history, Nehru has, gained this understanding that there is something different and complex that has taken place, through the centuries in India. And so he would like to sort of, look at this question not only from a straightforwardly scientific, rationalist perspective, but would bring in other elements into it. Now, it is of course true that we need to keep in mind that when we talk about the rational scientific approach, to history or to understand anything in life, that we are somewhere talking about a sort of critical questioning outlook. And that criticality and that questioning, attitude, that's the fundamental principle. But beyond that, it is not necessary to say, to have every aspect of understanding to be, say, typically rationalist in nature. For instance, when Nehru deals with the cultural question, for instance, and also the question of time itself. I mean, it is very interesting that Nehru actually breaks down the idea of history and the understanding of history into different aspects. One aspect being time, historical time, and it's amazing that not being sort of a philosopher of any sort. I mean, in the very formal academic sense, he's still able to philosophically ruminate on the idea of what we know as historical time. That what is historical time? What is the nature of historical time? And how do we perceive ourselves in relation to history and time? So when he's speculating on those aspects, and where the question of culture is also coming in, then one finds a different sort of a speculative historian at work, who is trying to make sense of things which are, not very easy to make sense of in a purely rationalist manner. So he is going into, but he has, he opens up spaces for us to think of things which are cultural in nature, which are part of our, our spiritual makeup as well, not from a necessarily pejorative sense, but also actually making them part of our being. And that is something that, I relate to. And there is something that, I had read about, I mean, long back when I was in JNU, a PhD student. I remember in the Time magazine, when, after India turned 50, there were a spate of, articles and essays in the media all over the world, and people were writing. And I remember reading this very lively essay in the Time magazine by Salman Rushdie. And let me just, and I was again reading it out today. And let me read out just two. paragraphs from it, and then I'll explain why I read it. But as I read it, you will immediately, get why I'm reading it in response to your question on, how Nehru looked at history, right? Okay. So this is Rushdie writing in this article. Here it is mentioned it was published on June 24th, 2001. It is titled India at 50, uh, or 50. Right? So this is the last, the sort of, uh, the penultimate two paragraphs, which I will just read out. In the modern age, we have come to understand our own selves as composites, often contradictory, even internally incompatible. We have understood that each of us is many different people. Our younger selves differ from our older selves. We can be bold in the company of our lovers and timorous before our employers, principled when we instruct our children, and corrupt when offered some secret temptation. We are serious and frivolous, loud and quiet, aggressive and easily abashed. The 19th century concept of the integrated self has been replaced by this jostling crowd of eyes. And yet, unless we are damaged or deranged, we usually have a relatively clear sense of who we are. I agree with my many selves to call all of it me. This is the best way to grasp the idea of India. A country that's taken the modern view of the self and enlarged it to encompass almost 1 billion souls. The selfhood of India is so capacious, so elastic, that it accommodates 1 billion kinds of difference. It agrees with its billion selves to call all of them Indian. This is a notion far more original than the old pluralist ideas of a melting pot or a cultural mosaic. It works because the individual sees his own nature writ large in the nature of the state. This is why Indians feel so comfortable about the strength of their national idea, why it's so easy to belong to it, in spite of all the turbulence, corruption, tawdiness, and disappointment of 50 overwhelming years. Now, when I read it for the first time so many years ago, I thought this was a page torn off from the discovery of India. You know that the discovery of India also ends with the very famous passage when Nehru says that we are like 1 billion individuals thinking differently from each other. So Rushdie's actually idea of India, as I have seen through the years from his very first novel Midnight Children, is is absolutely a product, if I may say, of the Nehruvian imagination of the nation, and which includes the idea of history, because when Rushdie also talks about being the bastard child of history and all of that, but that's a very different sort of a contemporary dilemma or problem, because if he is a bastard of history, what is that history that he is a bastard of? So that history is also something which equally interests him, and whenever he, if I may say, succumbs to that history of India's past, you can see he's no longer a bastard. Like he becomes part of that longer, larger history across time, to which he seemed to belong to. And here the very interesting aspect, but what I think Rushdie gets, which is sort of the essence of Nehru's historical imagination, is that it is possible to draw meanings of selfhood through history. And it is a selfhood which is not based on religion, not based on a certain myth, not based on this or that, but built on this certain principle, the historical principle. And for Nehru, that historical principle is the synthetic principle. And that's also something that secular individuals across a religion, across ideology, they relate to it.
That's very true. And you have mentioned about Discovery of India. Whenever I think of the book, it's such a fascinating work, and has guided a lot of historians working on history. They have used Discovery of India while they were researching, writing their history books. And Nehru, being an amateur historian who had no degree in history, he was a lawyer by profession, and he was in Ahmednagar Fort, jailed during the Quit India movement when he was writing this book, and also the glimpse of world history. Um, Having such a sense of history, such sense of civilization, writing verbatim, remembering facts and figures, and then writing it down in a jail diary, and then getting it published and making an impact of sorts, is something which is a very fascinating feat for any individual. Even Gandhi and others, his contemporaries, his mentors. So, there is a recent book called Nehru's India, History Through Seven Myths, by Taylor Sherman, where she has mentioned about seven myths that academicians believe to be true for many years, but she has contrary views on Nehru's legacy. The first myth that she talks about is the creation of his figure as the maker of independent India, as the founding father of independent India. She mentions that it was not just Nehru, but the colleagues that he was working with, his other colleagues that really helped him, and it was not just Nehru. How do you see the legacy of Nehru as the founding father? Because I think he was the person in whose tenure as the prime minister, the most number of dams were made, the most number of IITs were built, and the institutions were built. Planning commission was set up under Nehru. Even I'm trying to get into film history. He was the one who behind the Federation, Film Finance Corporation, funding films to make the new wave movement, and he was so involved in other Gyanpeeth or Sahitya Akademi or Lalit Kala Akademi and others. So an institution builder, and uh, preserver of arts and culture. How do you see him? How do you see his role as the maker of? And how do you, if you have read Taylor, if you want to also put forth a point around this myth?
See, I mean, I haven't unfortunately read her book yet. I hope to do that when I have some time. And I'm aware of the book, of course. And my thing is, I mean, I don't think we need to call anybody, for that matter, anywhere in the world, in phrases like, founding mothers and founding fathers, because, it gives a certain kind of a, it turns the figure into some kind of a patriarchal figure of the nation, who, are, yeah, I mean, who is somebody we have to look up in that sense. But surely we can probably replace that, that phrase with something like a founding mind of the nation. And surely there were are the people. I mean, just talking about Nehru, taking interest in Nehru does not mean that, we are less interested, or we feel that, other people have less contributions to make, which is of course not true. Nehru is just one, in important big figure, also because he held power, and because he was the principal leader, the political leader of the country. His impact is much more visible, wide ranging, and all of that. But to come to concrete aspects of where, Nehru becomes important for us to judge and evaluate critically, is of course these wide-ranging things that he's been part of. So you can have, like people have written about, a very critical view, say, of Nehru's modernist projects about, dams and all of that, where, the question of displacement of people, for instance has, comes into the question. But then we also, uh, you know, uh, congratulate him for taking up some of these very important modern day scientific projects, which have also helped us in help the economy, help the infrastructure for our power and other sort of uh, areas. So the building of power plants, the building of other scientific institutions, field of study, and all of that, and Nehru's interest in it, with Mahalanobis and all of the people. All of this is also part of they form the solid sort of structures that we have given to our scientific research and all of that, which is great. Uh, and what is interesting is that he's always kept that interest in cultural aspects alive, because he knew that only scientific progress is not really going to help till people's cultural sensibilities develop. They become more sophisticated. They're able to sort of express themselves in various ways, which is constantly also trying to, um, um, engage within their own traditions and color and cultures. Till that happens, we are not going to have a very dynamic process of these changes. So change was, I think, so important for Nehru, that India had to change. And that whole famous phrase of his about the garb of modernity is somewhere also about this thing about garb upon garb, right? I mean, you keep constantly changing the nature and the face of yourself, as if that is what is the demand of this time that we call modern, that constantly sounds we have to grapple with something new. And Nehru is, I think, like any even Western modernist, is very interested in newness. He's obsessed with newness. And he's always very sort of alert to growing old, because his whole critique of the past has been about India decaying and all of that, a very Gibbonish sort of idea of India's past being constantly under decay. Being alert to that question, he's, I think, very anxious that we have to keep doing things, keep producing new things, which is also the proof that we are thinking. We are constantly thinking about new ways of being in the world and to relate to ourselves. I hope that partly your answers your.
Yeah, it did, and it also brings forth the idea that Nehru was the first prime minister of a post-colonial. We were still in that colonial hangover, so to say, in very Gen Z terms, and India was struggling with a lot of things, and he was a leader who came forth and led the country through the winds of harshest winds of that time. And even today, the present time, if we have to see in the 21st century, our present generation of politicians try to imbibe what the Nehruvian outfit was, trying the kurtas and all the other kind of show off that the politicians puts on, and also trying to be Nehru 2.0 in some sense with their liberal looking foreign policies, with their other policies that they're trying to formulate now. So there are contemporary, in a way, reflections of Nehru in our present generation of politicians. So whether they agree with Nehru or not, whether they agree that he was the builder or not the builder of the modern India, they really cannot ignore Nehru. And this brings me to the question of the image building of Nehru in our times, because as Taylor and others have also pointed out, there are certain myths that have made him a larger than life figure in some senses. And do you think that image building has contributed to un uh, unwanted criticism, or unrelated criticism to Nehru after he, it's been more than 50, 60 years of him passing away, but he's still under the attack by various people. Do you think this image building has contributed to that, to those attacks on Nehru?
It's an interesting question. See, my understanding would be that, and to begin with, it is ironic that you started by saying how Nehru was against myths and mythologies, and then we find ourselves in a position where somebody has actually, a scholar has critiqued the fact that Nehru himself has turned into a myth, right? So the man who was against myths has been turned into a myth, and there is a very necessary critique of this problem. I'm sure, though I haven't read her, but we must raise questions. And for me, I think that this whole image building, I mean, it is somewhere, of course, not Nehru's responsibility. It is an image that has been consciously built by the Congress Party, and the Congress Party is responsible for it. And the problem happens when, if the party itself is not living up to Nehru's ideals and then merely using him as this, part of its image building exercise, and to constantly refer to him and make him this sort of a hollowed out figure where Nehru is supposed to justify, your politics and everything else. Whereas Nehru's real questions and worries and all of that is not really your point, and people can see that that this is not really the Nehruvian Congress as people knew it, with all its faults and its problems. But Nehru had this, deep honesty and a sort of sincerity and so many attributes which made him this great leader. So if the party which has built this image of Nehru across the decades and then not lived up to it, this is not really Nehru's problem, I would say, but definitely in itself it is a problem, which we need to deal with, and it's also to do with how we then critically assess Nehru. Now, to actually go overboard in dismissing Nehru and saying nasty things about him just because he has been used as a myth making exercise by some people, again, is wrong. Or we need to see Nehru with absolute freedom, critical freedom, and see what he really meant, what his thinking meant, and how did we also learn to understand our place in the world and our place in history through Nehru and Nehru's writings. And we are very lucky, for instance, if I just make a quick sort of a uh, you know distinction between what we got through Nehru and, say, for instance, a figure like Jinnah, the founding so-called quote-unquote father of Pakistan. Now he's hardly written anything in his life. He's only given public speeches and written letters, and that is it. He did not have the kind of reflective sort of those reflective attributes that Nehru's thinking mind had. So just to give say that, so when you have somebody like that, you build up your image of your nation, or the so-called founding principle of your nation, not really through a reflective a material of sorts, but largely through polemical material, right? So if if your founding mind is a mind of polemics, then you are also, you become part of that strategy, that sort of nature of thinking and imagining yourself. Whereas, because we have leaders like Nehru and Ambedkar and Gandhi and others, who have been constantly writing and reflecting, that we do have this very strong modernist tradition, no less stronger than the West, where we are constantly engaging with our past in a very, very deep manner.
Yes, and we will definitely have another podcast on Jinnah because we must talk about Jinnah as a interesting character, in much details, and we must also have Ishtiaq Ahmed as part of that conversation. So three of us sitting together, sipping tea and discussing Jinnah in the next part of the conversation. But coming back to Nehru again, and uh, you know. Um, you have meant the second chapter on your book is on modernity and the garb of modernity. Post independence in 47, India had two choices. One was Gandhian modernity, which was going back to the rural economy. The second was Nehruvian modernization, Soviet inspired socialist modernity. And the path that India chose was, of course, Nehruvian, because Gandhi lived not long after the partition and the independence. He was killed by a man of the Hindu Mahasabha in 48. So how do you see that modernity as compared to, and what if now let's go into those alternate history kind of sorts of grounds which are shaky grounds, but still, what if India had gone for the Gandhian modernity? Do you think we would have come so far in the growth story of India would have been this far?
That's a complicated question. I have often thought about it, but I don't really have I think, a very precise, clear answer to it. But what I understand is that, that uh, I'm not sure whether the Gandhian approach was complete in itself, precisely because, um, when you look at the way, the modern world has shaped up and how the capitalist economy has worked, that it is impossible to resist urbanization, building of cities, and to have a certain concentration of 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 institutions, wealth, a lot of things, around cities. But what the Gandhian sort of approach is always necessary for us to remember is that if we really neglect our villages and we don't develop them, maybe in a partly Nehruvian manner, so till then this whole village and city divide will remain. We will have this endless amount of migration. Whereas I'm not saying that I am against the migration of this kind, because I think if people want to migrate to cities for livelihood, for whatever, just to be part of the glitter and the glamour, people can, and people do that, right? Why should only we, enjoy the many attractions and ease and comfort of being in a city? Of course, when these migrants come to the city, it's never easy for them, but they still want come here with certain dreams in mind, and they want to really check it out. What is this? And so there has been this, but I think that we need to make the village infrastructures so self-independent, so strong that they are not constantly in need of things from the urban areas go there, right? I mean, so that self-sufficiency, that sense of independence, having good infrastructure, that's of course has been woefully lacking, and no wonder. Not only it was, it has been lacking all these decades. We have also actually seen that people have encroached upon those spaces. I mean, what we have seen in the last few decades about this whole mining, this whole mining industry and other people, they've really gone there and ransacked lands and people's livelihoods and all of that. And so that has created a deeper, a much more sinister problem of really violating upon those spaces. So on the one hand, you don't really help them to move up, and on that you give a free space to these sort of mafias to sort of go and make I mean make things worse for them. So from that perspective, yes, we have lost the sort of Gandhian touch when it comes to our villages. But I think the tide towards urbanization, cities, that was, I think, pretty inevitable, and there was no other way out of it, I think.
No, that's a very clever response, and thank you so much for that response. We are towards the end of our conversation, and there's so much more to talk about Nehru. We can't really limit it, but the podcast format only allows us to speak for 40 minutes. But there's so much more to really invest in having a conversation about, like his view on the freedom of expression, which is a pressing issue in our times. I remember an anecdote of Baba Nagarjun, the famous Hindi poet, criticizing Nehru in front of Nehru, and that famous that very famous poem called वतन बेचकर नेहरू पंडित नेहरू फूले नहीं समाते हैं बेशर्मी की हद है फिर भी बातें बड़ी बनाते हैं अंग्रेजी अमरीकी जोंकों की जमात में है शामिल फिर भी बापू की समाधि पर झुक झुक फूल चढ़ाते हैं. This was Baba Nagarjun reciting the poem in front of Nehru, and still Nehru wasn't that eager to send ED raids on Baba Nagarjun. The ED won't have find
What
anything
was
with
the
Nagarjun.
context? What was the context of the poem?
It was, I think, it was Nehru's birthday or something, where Indira Gandhi had invited Nagarjun, and Nagarjun at their place uh, recited the poem in front of all the people, criticizing Nehru. So Nehru was somebody who really welcomed criticisms, and I also read an anecdote where he was himself a self-critique, writing in the pseudonym of Charnakya in, I think, National Herald for a long time, where he used to oppose his own ideas, his own policies with a pseudonym. I don't think any politician of our generation would have that courage to do this, and let alone do this on himself or themselves. But even if the opposition party does it, they send ED raids or corruption charges, or they just want to silence the opposition. This is the reality that we live in. This is the kind of comparative analysis of Nehruvian India that was in the 60s, still the 60s, and this is the new India that we live in today. And the relevance of Nehru is that the ghost of Nehru still haunts those who are in ideologically on the opposite side of Nehru. He doesn't let them sleep even today. And that's why we have so many conversations on Nehru in 2023, in the 21st century, that talks a lot, volumes about the relevance of Nehru. There are so much. I think Atal Bihari Vajpayee, in his very famous parliament speech, also said that Nehru had a double standard in his character. He was Chamberlain at one point and Churchill on the other. And I think that is true for any historical figure, even with Vajpayee, for that matter. People are complex, and we have to understand that complexities when we think of them, not merely as people, but also as politicians, as thinkers, as people who were faced with certain challenges, and they were working under pressure of various sorts. So that's how we can appreciate figure like Nehru. Even if we want to criticize him, we have to agree that he was a leader at a time when India really needed a strong, iron fist to lead the nation. Thank you so much, Manas, and your book Nehru and the Spirit of India is a truly a delightful read, especially for somebody who admire Nehru like me, but for anybody who's interested in understanding Nehru's relevance in 21st century, the spirit of India that he stood for, that he advocated, that he himself created in a way, a confluence of his own ideas on civilization, his own idea on history, your reading of the discovery of India and his interpretation of discovery of India, all coming together, creating this book called Nehru and the Spirit of India. I think it's a delightful read for everybody who wish to read. It's available everywhere in bookstores and Amazon and other places. Do get your copy and keep listening to Caravan Better. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram, on Facebook, on Twitter. We will be back with more such conversations. Thank you, everybody, and thank you, Manish, for joining in today.